Hi everybody. In this lecture I'm going to talk about implementing DDL replication. In this lecture you will be able to understand the requirements and restrictions on implementing DDL replication in Oracle Golden Gate. Understand the DDL replication scopes, set up a DDL replication, control the behavior of a DDL replication, and finally handling errors generated by DDL replication. DDL replication is supported by Oracle Golden Gate 12c in Oracle and Teradata platforms. By default, the extract process doesn't capture the DDL operations, but the replicate by default applies them. Depending on your application, you may need to consider enabling the DDL application in your Golden Gate configuration. However, there are some restrictions that you need to study before you do that. You may need to do some changes before you are able to configure the DDL in your environment. In order to enable the DDL replication, the following conditions must apply. The source and the target definitions must be identical. Therefore, if you are using Golden Gate of version before 12c, the parameter assume target diffs must be configured. The data pump process must run in pass-through mode. It cannot manipulate the data. You also need to make sure that the parameter wildcard resolve is set to the dynamic value, and that is the default value of that parameter. If your databases are of Oracle 11g, you need to disable the recycle bin. In DML, you have basically three commands: insert, update, and delete, which are executed against table objects. But in DDL, you have much more commands like create, alter, rename, drop, and you can execute them against a long list of object types like views, synonyms, indexes, packages, procedures, functions, etc. Therefore, it is expected to have some restrictions in Oracle Golden Gate if you want to replicate DDL operations. Also, there are a lot of options that can be configured in Golden Gate when you work with DDL replication. I am listing here the basic restrictions that are applicable when you configure DDL replication in Oracle Golden Gate. As is the case with the DML replication, Golden Gate is using a database user for DDL replication. A table space must be dedicated to that database user. No other user should use that table space. Do not use the getTruncates parameter when you configure Golden Gate for DDL replication, because truncate table command is already supported by the DDL replication. When you use the alter table rename command to rename an object, the old and the new table name should not be longer than 18 characters in its length. DDL statements you pass to Golden Gate are measured in bytes, not in number of characters. The total DDL statements should not exceed 4 megabytes in its size. Bear in mind that some size might be needed by internal processing. User exit logic cannot be triggered by DDL operations. You will learn about user exit later in this course. Some object names and name prefixes cannot be replicated because they are used internally by Oracle. Refer to the documentation installing and configuring Oracle Golden Gate for Oracle Database 12c. To obtain a list of those reserved names. Also, some DDL operations are not supported, like DDL on nested tables, DDL on invisible columns, on identity columns, or DDL on standby database. Again, refer to the same documentation to obtain a list of those commands. If you are using DDL replication in a bidirectional configuration, your configuration must contain two and only two databases. You cannot configure DDL replication on a multi-master environment where more than two databases are configured. Also, if you apply a DDL operation against an object containing columns of a user-defined type or LOB data types, it is recommended to make sure that all the DML operations on those columns are applied before you execute the DDL statements. Before you configure Oracle Golden Gate to use the DDL replication, you may need to run some setup scripts. Those scripts must be executed if one of the following conditions apply. The Oracle database version you're working with is 11.203 or older than that. The second condition where you must run those scripts is if the Golden Gate processes are running in classic mode. If you are working with a database newer than version 11.203, and if you are running the Oracle Golden Gate processes in integrated mode, you don't need to run those setup scripts. Those setup scripts basically create triggers and some supporting objects that will be used by Oracle to capture DDL operations. The slide is showing some of those script files. This is the procedure that you need to follow to configure DDL replication in Oracle Golden Gate. You will implement this procedure in the practice lecture. DDL operations in Oracle Golden Gate are divided into three scopes: mapped, unmapped, and other. I will explain in the incoming slides about the differences between those scopes. When objects are specified in table and map statements in the parameter files, they are of mapped scope. This slide is showing an example. We have the imp table defined in the table and map statements. If you run the DDL statement alter table hr.imp add nodes in the source database, it will be executed as alter table sales.employees add nodes in the target database. If a DDL operation is supported for use in a table or map statement, but its base object name is not included in one of those parameters, it is of unmapped scope. The slide is showing an example of creating a table called report 0134. If that table name is not stated in the table or map statements, it will be considered of the unmapped scope. DDL operations that cannot be mapped are considered to be of other scope. Examples of the DDL operations that come under this category are create user, create role, and alter table space. DDL parameter is the most important parameter for configuring DDL replication in Oracle Golden Gate. It is used to enable the DDL support, filter that DDL operations, and configure a processing action based on a DDL record. Its syntax may look long, but using it is actually easy. Include and exclude keywords identify the beginning of an inclusion or exclusion clauses respectively. Include includes specific DDL for capture or delivery, and exclude excludes specific DDL from being captured or delivered. The inclusion or exclusion clause must consist of the include or exclude keyword followed by any valid combination of other DDL parameter options. The keywords mapped, unmapped, other, and all are used to define the scope of the DDL statements that you want to capture or apply. Use the op-type keyword to specify the type of the DDL operation. It could take the values create, alter, rename, drop, grant, revoke, or any DDL statement supported by the database. Use the object type keyword to specify the type of the database object. It could take the values table, index, trigger, sequence, snapshot, snapshot log, synonym, table space, user, role, or any database object supported by the database. The object name is used to specify the name of the object, for example, the table name. Wildcards are accepted. NSTR is used to filter the DDL statements that contain a specific character string within the command syntax itself, but not within the comments used in the command. On the other side, the NSTR comments keyword filters the statements based on the characters in the comments, but not in the command. This is not the full syntax of the command, by the way. I'm just showing here the most commonly used options in the parameter. We have here two examples of using the DDL parameters. The first one captures or applies all the DDL statements. The second example is a bit more complicated. It includes the unmapped DDLs, but only the alter statements that are applied on only the tables. And the table names should start with the word report, and they are all owned by the HR schema. All those conditions apply for only the unmapped statements, but the parameter includes all the mapped objects, excluding the objects whose names start with temporary.tab. I just would like to remind you that if you want to assign a multi-line value to a parameter, each line must end with an ampersand. This rule doesn't apply to the map and table parameters. Use the DDL options parameter to control the options that govern the DDL processing other than filtering and string substitution. As you can see from its syntax, it has a long list of options to configure. I will shed some light on the most commonly used ones. When you use the add-tran data, Oracle Golden Gate will automatically create the supplemental logging of a table that has been created or altered. The option default user password is used to change the password that has been used in the create or alter user statements in the source database. The provided password will be used when the statement is executed in the target database. Get APL ops and ignore APL ops options control whether or not DDL operations produced by the applications should be captured by the extract. The get replicates and ignore replicates options are valid for only extract process. They control whether or not DDL operations produced by the replicate are included in the trail. For a bidirectional configuration, use the get APL ops option with the ignore replicates option, so that the extract will capture the DDL statements executed by the applications but not by the replicate process. Map session schema is used to set source target mapping for session schemas. It is used for objects whose schemas are not qualified in the DDL. The password encrypt key option instructs the extract to encrypt all passwords in the source DDL before writing the DDL to the trail. The report and the no report are used to control whether or not to write expanded DDL statistics on report file. With this option, more information is written in the report than what you would have if this option wasn't used. The Update Metadata option instructs the replicate to update its object metadata cache. This is important in bidirectional configuration. If some DDL statement changes the structure for table that's being used by the replicate needs to be aware about those changes. This option solves the problem for you, and you must use it in a bidirectional configuration. Here we have an example of using the Map Session Schema option. We have here an excerpt from an extract parameter file. The extract that uses this parameter file captures all the DDL statements issued against the objects in the schemas in SRC1 and SRC2. On the replicate side, we have Map Session Schema option being used to map the SRC1 to DST1 and SRC2 to DST2. So if you have a create table statement executed in the source database to create a table in SRC1 schema, the replicate will execute the statement to create the table in the DST1 schema. You use the parameter DDL error to handle anticipated errors when DDL support is enabled. You have two syntaxes for using this parameter. One syntax for the extract process, and the other one is to be used for the replicate process. When you use this parameter with the extract process, you have two options to configure. One is the restart skip, and the other one is skip trigger error. Restart skip causes the extract to ignore the specific number of DDL operations on startup. By default, the extract appends when it counters the first DDL error so that no operation is skipped. To write information about the skipped operations to the extract report file, use the DDL options parameter with the report option. The skip trigger error causes the extract to skip and ignore a specific number of DDL errors that are caused by the DDL trigger on startup. Handling errors in the replicate side is similar to handling errors with DML operations. You can define a default response to all DDL errors, or you can define a response to a specific error number. I will show you examples in the next slide. We have here two examples of using DDL error parameter. In the first one, the replicate will append if it counters the error number 1, 2, 3, 4. This applies for all the objects whose names start with tab. Also, the replicate will ignore the error number 5, 6, 7, 8. As you can see, in this example, you can use the DDL error parameter multiple times in the parameter file. In the second example, if the replicate faces the error number 1, 2, 3, 4, it will try to rerun the offending statements 3 times after waiting 10 seconds between each attempt. If it couldn't succeed to rerun the statement, it will ignore the error. This rule applies for objects whose names start with tab, but not with the objects whose names start with tab 1. Beside the options in the DDL parameter that we have covered in this lecture, you can use built-in filter rules or PL SQL code to implement advanced rules for filtering DDL operations. You might never need to apply those advanced filtering techniques. However, to obtain more information about them, refer to the documentation installing and configuring Oracle Golden Gate for Oracle Database 12c. In the next practice lecture, you will implement the DDL replication. Till seeing you over there, thank you very much.